Welcome to Radio Control Car Shed. Today I would like to start talking a little bit about the latest XV01 build that I have made. This specific build will probably be my last XV01 and will be very much a composition of all the best bits, ESCs, etc., coming from various different companies. In this specific case, I will be most likely using a Hobbywing ESC. We will also be using motors from one of my old collection. I've got quite a few of these motors actually lying around, and they're all from my old touring car days. The likely scenario though will be that I will put a 10.5 turn motor in, but I need to make sure that the motor that I put in fits the XV01, and the reason for this is that the XV01 has a motor mounting plate, or rather reinforcement section, that covers over where the soldering points of the motors are. So based off that, these various motors all have different points of solder for the connection wires. This means that I will need to make sure that whichever motor I will not have binding up issues with regard to one specific plate, and I will actually show that later on when I do the build so that you can understand exactly what we're talking about. The transmission will also be beefed up with these aluminium pulleys and these drive shafts from Embie Racing. Actually, with regards to the drive shafts, I must point out that I would normally not be using the Embie Racing shafts because they're made of aluminium and they do tend to break. By comparison, the Tamiya shafts are much stronger because they are actually made out of steel. The suspension has also been upgraded using these Embie Racing aluminium components, which will be used to mount the suspension arms, much stronger than the plastic components that come with the kit as original. They ensure durability when rocks, etc. get stuck under the arms. It's very good to have. These steering arms, by comparison, are a bit of a nice to have, not really a necessity, but we might add them, I'm not sure yet. This slipper clutch is definitely something that you want to have. It not only controls power to the gearbox, ensuring durability and lasting when you're using much stronger motors, but it also allows you to use standard 48 pitch type gears. These spacers are also something else that I like to change, simply because those plastic bits always used on the kits will fall off whenever you're pulling the wheels off, and you lose the pins associated with them. So these are very, very handy. They don't fall off, and you always know that your pins are not going to get lost accordingly. The suspension arms are also being replaced with these much more durable items that come off the Tamiya XV01 truck version. The material is softer, there is more pliability, but it actually does not really matter given that this car is used on dirt surfaces, which actually don't require accuracy, unlike if it was a pure touring car for much smoother surfaces. So I love the concept of added durability, and I've decided I will add these on. I'll now actually start to show you guys the certain parts of the kit that I feel need to be focused on to ensure added durability. So one of the first things that I'm very keen on is differential oil, and in this case I use very, very thick Diff Oil, as you can see, and the reason for that is it tends to provide me with more stability going around corners, especially on these rally cars. So if you saw the video earlier on, you'll see that the car tended to handle a bit more stably around the corners, and that is because from my perspective, thicker oil in the diffs just provides for more stability. Yes, it tends to make the car push a bit more, understeer a bit more, but it is a much more stable car. You can see that this Diff Oil is truly approximately thickness of jelly, very thick jelly. Now, this stuff is a mess to work with. You can see it's very, very thick, but it's well worth putting this into your diffs, not only because it makes the car handle more stably, but also from my perspective because it just doesn't leak anywhere near as much as the thinner Diff Oils. These are the dreaded NN spacers that degrade when pushed against the pin in the drive shaft within each of the front and rear transmissions. The pin itself, which seats the gears, as you can see here, that's the pin and that's the drive shaft. That pin, when pushed against the NN spacer, destroys the NN spacer and ultimately causes the gears to shift. So these shims here that I've got of various thicknesses are used to protect the NN spacer from that little pin. So it's very, very important to get some of these spacers here, or rather shims, sorry, shim up the gears and ensure that that NN spacer is protected and shielded from that pin by these spacers. So you can see here, that's where we've got a shim, and you can see that's the gear itself. We put shims on either side and we just make sure there is no play and that that shim protects the NN spacer. Now, so in order for you to actually see more detailed what I'm talking about here, you can see that's the NN spacer there. That's the gear which has the shaft in that slot. And if I just find that there is the pin, we put the pin in to the drive shaft. Just hang on a second. In putting that pin in, now you can see that's the gear that I'm talking about that needs that shaft. Against that NN spacer normally goes straight in there. Now that pin over time degrades. That NN spacer pushes the pin out as a result from that gear there, and that gear destroys itself around that little slot there, and that's what you don't want to have happen. Here you can see we put the shim in front of that little pin, and then the NN spacer now goes on. And there, with that, the NN spacer will be protected from that little pin rubbing against it, and that's the key here. So another very good idea is to get yourself some titanium head screws. These are the hex type heads, which make them very usable compared with these Phillips heads, which come with all the Tamiya kits and are truly quite a pain to use. These are from Embie Racing, and they are actually very good. They've got more than enough to fill an entire XV01 kit, so definitely worth the money. So I'd also mention to you all about the slipper system, and as you can see here, we've got the actual slipper plate here, and that goes into the drive shaft as follows. And this then has the pads attached to the actual spur gear, and they sandwich the pads with these two metal plates that you can see down there. Now if we just put these spur gear on, you can see it sits there. I've got one pad, now I've got to put the other pad on the other side. The plate will go ultimately there and will sandwich once that other shaft, as I showed you earlier, goes all the way through and then is attached by a spring on the other side with a lock nut, and that will sandwich together the whole spur system. So another one of the key areas which we have is motors. Now this is something which is quite important, because the motor, where it mounts in terms of the motor mount, you can see this plastic bit here, and that can actually intrude on where the wires solder to. So you've always got to make sure you've got a motor which has these motor mounting plates for the solder wire at the very edge, or as close to the edge as possible. So this is one of my older Orca motors which I have. I will also show you, I've got another motor here that I can actually use, but it's very close to the edge. But if you look at it, so this one also has tabs that are slightly further in than the old Orca that I have. So you can see there that it's sitting further in, but this can still fit just, if you have a look here, look at that. So we can just fit it, and you just have to be very careful with your soldering. It doesn't go beyond the actual external portion. So you've got to be very mindful that when you're buying a motor, make sure you buy one that actually fits. Now these shock absorber mounts here are the original plastic ones. The likely scenario is I may change them to the carbon fiber later, but for now they're very robust and the flexibility doesn't really bother me. You can see that I've used both on the front and the rear, the exact original stock shock absorber mounts with the titanium screws in all positions. For the chassis plate, I've actually decided to use the Embie Racing conversion kit, which allows batteries to be mounted in a rearmost position here, or to be actually mounted at other portions. But what I do like is that the weight balance of this is pushing a bit more towards the rear of the car, which I feel this car's rear is just a bit on the light side. I've actually put these batteries on, or rather the battery mount position on incorrectly. It should be reversed in terms of the long bit, but I will get that sorted later. You can see here the chassis is more or less complete with the gearboxes, etc. in place. A bit of flex, which I'm not too concerned with. Overall, it's nice because there is this carbon fiber reinforcement on the top, and that actually also allows for the center mounting of a servo, as well as the belt to be protected by the belt cover. Battery positioning still needs to be sorted out. The overall chassis quality is very good. Be very interesting to see how this chassis handles as compared with the standard XV01. As I mentioned earlier, the servo is centrally mounted here instead of on the side, although it does allow four-side mounting as well. The central mounting is supposed to be far better for the rallying, and it provides with much more steering angle. So this is a key benefit of the Embie Racing suspension, or Embie Racing chassis. So I had to remove the top deck in order to install the arms, and as you can see, the arms here are the grey truck arms from the XV01 truck version. I've used them together with the Embie Racing metal components, and these metal components here are far more robust in the event rocks get jammed under the arms. They do not break, they do not strip out. The battery, again, I still have yet to do. I keep on saying I'm going to do it, and I will get around to that in due course. So the bits and pieces continue to roll in, and I've now finally got myself the shocks that I wanted to get, the TRF shock absorbers. These are the touring car shocks. These are some alternate springs that I will try in due course. Again, we're not too sure what's going to work best, but we'll get around to that in due course. We've also got a few more pieces to replace the plastic components from GPM. These all are really parts that I've always wanted to get. They are robust, as well as the front universal joints. These things are hard as gold to get, and very good because they are much stronger, to my mind, than the Tamiya versions. They've got the triple spring around the actual universal joint mounting, which is very good. And down here I've just got a heat sink with a mount position for a fan, should I choose to put that on later. The overall chassis is more or less complete. We've got the new universal joints in there, which will allow for much more significant movement in steering without worrying about the dog bones coming out, and it's well reinforced compared to the Tamiya items. In addition to that, you can see that the overall chassis now has got the additional steering arms in place that allow for not only steering but the mudguards both front and rear, and that's for the centralized steering, sorry, I might add. We've also got here the heatsink that you can see. The motor's now installed and it will clear the soldering, and that's the overall chassis as it stands now. And with that, it's time to start getting the electronics onto this chassis. So electronics wise, I've decided to install this 10BL120 Hobby Wing ESC, which has 120 amp ratings, and it allows for me to put much more powerful motors into this vehicle, and I think that will just provide for more versatility and allow me to put much shorter turn motors in there, get the car going a lot faster. Whilst this ESC is not one of their top of the line ESCs, it is more than enough for this project. In terms of its programmability, in terms of its amperage rating, we're quite happy with where it stands. Build wise, of course, not up to the standards of their XR Pro Series ESCs. You can see it has these really colorful wires. It's also got a plastic body as compared with the metal bodies of their more serious range of ESCs. But again, overall, definitely more than enough for this project. Here we have everything pretty much installed, ESC soldered in, motor's been soldered to the ESC now. Overall, you can see that the ESC is positioned a bit more further forward. We've put that together with steering servo, centrally mounted, etc. Now it's all moving forward. Connectors are now for my touring car battery connectors. As you can see, that's my touring car battery there. Again, not the safest type of connectors if you're a beginner, but if you've known and you've used these connectors for a long time and you make sure you don't reverse the polarities, it's a very neat solution. You can also see that the overall battery positioning is now complete. We're pretty much ready to get to the next stage, which is now final completion of the car. That really just entails putting on the wheels, the body shell, detailing, etc. That's the fun part. So we've done everything here. We've synced up the receiver. It's all ready. I look forward to bringing you the final conclusions to this project, which is probably for me the most fun part of the project, which is the body shell. So we'll get to that hopefully in the next video, and in the meantime, thank you very much for having watched this video. Do take care and stay healthy and stay safe.